This was in February of this year. We have a cottage about 45 minutes away from my parents' home. It's not too far from Huntsville, Muskoka, Ontario, if anyone wants a visual. Thing is, it's completely unfinished. The basement has no proper flooring and has a slight water leak right now, so there are plenty of fans and a dehumidifier running. As a result, one of us needs to check on the place at least once every 2 or 3 weeks to empty the dehumidifier in the basement and just make sure that everything is okay. To describe the house layout a bit, the entrance to the basement is directly in front of the main entrance. It's a long, skinny staircase down with a low roof, so you need to crouch on the way down. There is one crappy light bulb in the ceiling, so it's always super dark down there. There's one big room, then two hallways branching off. One hallway leads to a bedroom, and the other leads to not only a second bedroom, but also a washroom, all of which are completely unfinished and without lighting. The second hallway is much longer, and the rooms are just way off in the back corner of the basement and are completely dark. In other words, it's creepy looking. Okay, so let's get to the good part. The day it all went down. My mom and I are headed up there to empty the dehumidifier, have some lunch, and clean out some junk. We're slowly gutting the place. It had been nearly 3 weeks since we'd checked up on the place by this point. We stopped at the McDonald's beforehand and each got a fillet of fish combo. First time trying one, and it was actually pretty tasty. We got into the place and put our food on the table, and then turned the heat on. The first thing we do is run downstairs to turn the water on and check the dehumidifier. After turning on the water, we head over to the dehumidifier and notice that there's hardly any water in it. It looks like it's only been running for a couple days. There's still the regular amount of moisture on the ground, but it was strangely empty. My mum and I head upstairs and she grabs her phone to text my dad and asks if he had stopped by to empty the dehumidifier recently. He said he hadn't. We were both puzzled as to why it looked so empty, but never considered there was a third person in the house with us. After heating up our food, we both sit down at the table and turn on the TV. About 5 minutes into our meal, we hear a massive bang downstairs, almost as if someone stubbed their toe really badly on a cupboard or something like that. We instantly jump and look at one another with a freaked out look on our faces. The TV is still playing rather quietly. Then we hear the worst thing. We hear a small grunt downstairs. It was unmistakably a human vocal sound. My mum whispers to me, "Is that a person?" And I smirk and nod my head yes. Although it was freaky at the moment, I wasn't really taking it very seriously for some reason. Looking back, this was pretty serious and this person could have been very dangerous. I just told her, "Grab your jacket and let's head out to the car and call the police." We gather our stuff and I grab a kitchen knife on the way. If you'll recall, the entrance to the basement is directly across from the main entrance to the house. So I had to make this peek around the corner and was fully expecting to see a person on the dark staircase. But luckily, it was just a series of stairs down into the dark abyss. Once we're out front, we jump in my car and she calls the cops immediately. Within 3 minutes, 4 cruisers show up and 5 cops got out. We told them what had happened and they headed down the driveway. They were in the house for probably 10 minutes before the door opened. A couple of cops walked out and boom. The third cop brought out a short, chubby guy with long black hair and pop bottle glasses. They brought him out handcuffed out onto the front steps and another cop had a bag that looked like his belongings. We were in our car, which was up the street a bit and facing away from the entrance of the cottage. But my mom turned away as soon as he was brought up the driveway. She didn't want to get a good look at him, as the whole situation was pretty unsettling for her. They loaded him in the back of one of the cruisers and took him away. One cop came over and spoke with my mom for a bit about the situation. Ultimately, my parents had decided not to press charges against the guy when it was all said and done. He was just sleeping on the cold cement ground with a small roll-out mattress, even though there was a proper bed upstairs. This made us think that he'd been down that back hallway in the unfinished bedroom for a while. We probably walked downstairs to empty the dehumidifier and turn on off the hot water a number of times, and he was like 15 feet away in one of the bedrooms. He probably wasn't a bad person, and I'm personally at least a bit thankful he decided to empty the dehumidifier. Hopefully, he lived in there for most of the colder months this past winter. We're just lucky it didn't turn out to be in one of those crazy squatting situations. It's a story that happened to me at the beginning of the year. It's in France, so I apologise for my English. A few years ago, I was dating a great man for whom I have a lot of respect. He's a good person. He's kind of the perfect man. Noah. We broke up because I had to move to begin my training as a magistrate. It was a peaceful breakup. We have a lot of affection for each other. We're still very good friends. Our families are friends too. It's kind of funny because he lives where my parents live. For my part, I live in the same neighbourhood as Noah's parents. It's a friendly and caring relationship that we have now. Because of COVID-19, I can't go see my parents for Christmas and New Year. I spend the holidays with Noah's parents. 2 weeks later, in January, I leave my house to go to work. Someone wrote insults on my door. My car is scratched. My blood's freezing. I'm pretty shocked. You should know that magistrates in France are protected. Fines and prison sentences are even harsher when an offence is committed against them. I'm a little afraid that it's due to a case I'm working on. I deal mainly with land stories, buildings, and damn it, there are people who are crazy sometimes. It is not a reasonable fear because I work on cases without dangerous people. I had to contact the cops, inform the court, etc. These kind of stories are not taken lightly. The police quickly find out who the person is behind it, a certain Elsa. At that time in France, anyone leaving their home after 7 p.m. without permission was fined €135. The day before, someone had been caught 2 kilometers away and fined. The police asked me if I knew the person who did this. She's a lady in her mid-60s. Her face is unknown to me. I'm not withdrawing my complaint. A week later, I get a call from Noah who warns me that he's visiting his parents with his girlfriend, whom he's been dating for a year. We're both friends on social media and she's a normal person. At that time in France, to move between different regions, you had to have a good motive. I didn't ask him about it. I told him myself that he just wanted to see his parents and that he found an excuse to come. I come home from work at night and it does not miss. I surprised the crazy old lady of the photo near the entrance of my building. She clearly drank before I got there. I'm on the defensive, ready to fight if it's unpleasant. She called me a whore. I was too involved in a guy's life, that I was trying to separate them. In short, that I was the other woman in her daughter's couple. I don't ask her any questions and I let her talk, stunned. Furious, I call the policeman who tried to calm the old lady. I went up to my house with a few men because my presence made her angry. Later, I learned that she went to a van, but they didn't let her drive because she was drunk. It was only a few days later that I learned the truth. Noah visits me on weekends with his girlfriend. She told me that they came for her mother who was declared demented. Apparently she almost assaulted someone. Police found a shotgun in the back of her car. A little panicked, I asked her if her mother's name was Elsa. The police and doctors thought she was just crazy and she wanted to attack me for no reason. But Noah's girlfriend explained that it was because I'd spent Christmas with her boyfriend's parents when she couldn't do it. Her mother had taken the news very badly and she was afraid that her daughter would lose her boyfriend. I'd rather laugh about her than cry. The mother is on treatment. I withdrew my complaint. I think about this story now because I learned that Noah and his girlfriend are expecting a baby. What a funny story. Back then, this parcel of land was owned by my dad and a business partner. It was essentially vacant, although we had taken on a few tenants who needed space to restore old sailboats or store industrial machinery. Being in a somewhat remote area, we were not immune to trespassers, and tenants would tell us about stolen tools or machinery parts often. This is where we met Dan. Dan came to my father much in the same way many others did. He had a boat restoration business and needed a place to work. He also asked if it would be okay if he slept on the property a few nights a week, under the guise of it saving him commuting if he worked late on a project. This was mutually beneficial, as Dan seemed like a decent guy and it would be nice to have a presence there overnight. We let him have a reduced rent rate as compensation for him generally keeping an eye on the place. A few months later, Dan had built himself a little compound, a series of 3 sea containers in a horseshoe configuration with a little trailer in the middle. Over the same period of time, we noticed that Dan didn't seem to work. There were never boats there, and Dan's a few nights a week became every night. Soon after, the excuses for why he didn't have rent started coming in. Effectively, we had invited a squatter into our property. Dan became the same people we wanted him to keep out. Trying to look at the bright side, my dad and his partner were still okay with this, as it was beneficial to have someone there at all hours. The theft had gone down substantially, and Dan's rent, even when paid in full, was not tipping any financial needles for us, so we let it be for the time. About a year later, Dan's mental health was starting to show its cracks. He went from polite to aggressive and bitter. He wasn't violent and was always very courteous to me personally. I was 23 at the time. But when he was asked about money and back rent, he would get very defensive and start blaming my dad and his partner for why he couldn't pay. My dad wasn't afraid of anybody, but Dad made him nervous. My dad's partner was a friend who had recently dealt with a similar renter-turned-squatter situation, and when he called the police for assistance, he was thanked by the squatter with a bullet in his stomach. A few $1,000s back rent or an eviction was not worth a gunshot to my dad, and we all felt that Dan was capable of snapping that way. So, we just kept Dan doing cleanup and random tasks, which he always did, and remarkably well. One day, my dad asked me to run up to the site for him, as he was out of town. A tenant had called because it looked like someone had tried to cut through a piece of our fence, and he wanted to get eyes on it. I pulled into the property, where I was greeted by Dan. "Hey buddy," he yelled and waved. Dan was always very respectful to me, a courtesy of which he had stopped showing my dad and his partner some time ago. "Hey Dan," I yelled back as I parked and got out of my car. "Come check this out," Dan replied, and waved for me to step inside his little compound area. I was dying to see what was going on in there, honestly. I knew Dan was off, but I never felt intimidated or in danger, just another weird guy. I walked over, and Dan brought me next to one of the sea containers. "Check this out." The sea container had a roll-up door on the side instead of the typical latch and swing doors on the end. He rolls up the door to a wall. I look closer and he has welded a metal wall 2 feet into the sea container. "What am I looking at, Dan?" "Skirt down the pathway to the left," he says and points. I look down the narrow pathway and see a small opening at the end, maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. "Check it out." I really should not have gone in, but again, curiosity and that feeling of invincibility you have as a 23-year-old overshadowed my better judgment. I squeezed down the hall and through the door into the main hold of the sea container. The interior was painted deep red. Shag carpet had been poorly glued to the ground. On every wall and surface, broken pieces of mirror had been glued. And in the back, an old-style prison door had been welded in place. And behind it, a small round bed with shiny satin sheets. There are times when you can't really believe what you're seeing is real. The sensory overload of this enclosed place was too much. I don't know how long I stood there, but was snapped back to reality when Dan, standing right behind me, says, "I love to party in here." I didn't even realise he followed me in. One good piece of advice my dad gave me when dealing with tricky situations was always, play along as long as you're safe, until a moment comes that you can't get away fast and safely. I ran through the scenarios. I had done MMA and kickboxing in college. I'm not a small guy, but neither was Dan. Do I punch him and run and risk God knows what? Are there weapons hidden in here? I decided for the path of least resistance. "Wow, Dan, this place is sick. I bet with some weed and some music, you could spend hours back here." "Yeah, man. You should come back and we can hang in there together. It'd be wild. His face softened, like he had found a friend who got it. Look, Dan, I want to hang bad, but I came here to meet my dad and he should be pulling up right now, so I have to go meet him. Dan shrugged and I walked past him, squeezing through pathways until I was back outside. I calmly walked to my car, got in, and left. I relayed the story to my dad and his partner, who thought it was odd, but due to the fear of potential violence from Dan, both my dad and his partner weren't certain Dan didn't know our home address. We didn't call the authorities. We did, however, keep a very close eye on Dan, and actually brought in another tenant to stay the night and keep an eye both on Dan and the property. Eventually, Dan decided to move on. One day we showed up and his containers were being loaded onto a shipper, but he was nowhere to be found. He had moved on, leaving behind only sea container footprints and 3 dumpsters worth of garage. I told the police the story soon after along with his name, and they said they would keep their ears out, but not knowing where he went or if Dan was even his real name, there wasn't much they could do. In the time since, we have never had a visit from or heard from Dan. The only people I told this story to were my paintball friends at work, who would practice with me on this property and knew Dan since he was always there, and coined the nickname Sex Dungeon Dan. Back in 2004, I was getting tired of paying rent and decided that I wanted to buy a small place for myself. My finances were tight and I couldn't afford to do it on my own, but my dad, being a real estate developer and investor, made a deal with me. He would help with the down payment, I would pay the mortgage, and in 2 to 3 years when we sold it, we'd split the profit. My dad had a great eye for house potential, and being a second generation builder in the area, everybody knew him, and brokers would often show him off-market houses, ones that were going up for sale to the public soon, but were taking offers now. Our day started out simple enough. Go to a few open houses and see what was available. My dad's favourite broker was accompanying us that day and had a list of potentials for our viewing, starting with a house in a town called Terra Linda. We pulled up to the house and it was cute. Small and old, like every house in the neighbourhood, but it clearly had good bones and was a really, really good price. This was the kind of house my dad loved and would have been an easy flip, so we went inside. Immediately a smell, an almost sweet, rotting smell, filled our noses. When I say filled our noses, I actually sort of mean punched us in the face. My dad leaned over to me in his always calm manner and said, "Don't worry, we can replace the carpets and paint the walls. That'll fix the smell." "Okay, great, Dad. There is no carpet." That's when we looked down and noticed that the floor of this house was bare concrete. The owners had the carpets removed, our broker told us as she shrugged. "Okay, that's odd, but let's keep looking." We walked through the living room, a wonderful space no doubt. But why the huge holes cut into the sheetrock? Large 3-foot diameter holes. And not just one, but several. Shrugs all round. We toured the bathrooms, all 3 of them, and each toilet was filled with different varieties of fruit. One filled with oranges, one with apples, and the last, I believe, with grapefruits. What is this house? We left and I expressed my confusion to my dad, who again calmly said, "Yeah, it's kind of a dump. I can have a crew in here and have all of that fixed and looking great in 2 weeks." Seemed fair enough. We leave, actually excited about the property, and decide to go to the next one. Our broker walks us inside and exchanges pleasantries with the broker who was showing that specific house. They're talking, and she mentions showing us the house on Hibiscus, and he says, "Oh, the dead lady house." Our broker nods, and that was the end. Wait, what? We look at the second house, and I ask the broker about the dead woman house. She says, "Oh, the owner of that house was an old woman who recently passed away, and she lived with her son there." And that was sort of it. My dad noticed my uneasiness with that answer. "Houses don't have feelings," he said, "and everyone has to die somewhere." My dad had bought plenty of houses where people had died, and several where murders had taken place. It didn't affect him. He looked at houses as wood and paint, not energy and feelings. I told him it didn't bother me, but inside, it really did. We looked at a few more houses that day, and at the end, my dad and I decided to put an offer on the Terra Linda house. It really was a great deal, and as my dad said, everyone dies somewhere. I'll burn some sage or whatever, and that'll be that. I'll admit that a little bit of greed took over as well. The house was well under market in a nice area. In 2 years, I could make enough to put a down payment on a new place and not need my dad's help anymore. That was appealing. We placed an offer and went home. That night, I couldn't shake the uneasiness of the dead lady comment. I went on the webpage of my local newspaper and searched the archive. I entered the address, and the first story that pops up: woman dead in house for 6 months with handicapped son. This isn't just a dead lady house. Turns out this lady had a son who got into college in the mid-70s, and in turn did a lot of drugs. So many that he quite literally fried himself, not so far as becoming a vegetable, but unable to really care for himself. So he moved in with his mom, and 30 plus years later, when she passed away, he didn't know what to do. So he just did nothing. Over the weeks and months since his mother's passing and being unable to pay bills, slowly the utilities and garbage stopped. And the smell coming from the house, not to mention nobody seeing the old lady who lived there, caused a concerned neighbour to request a wellness check from the police. Hundreds of pounds of trash and maggots in the walls was quoted by an interviewed officer. 1 week later, and we're putting an offer in. I called my dad and read in the article. He was admittedly shocked and told me about his business partner Bob, who lives in a murder-suicide house. Don't worry about it. I kept worrying. The next day I woke up and the worry had not subsided. I reread the article. I noticed there was no mention of the son. The article said he was taken to a hospital and examined, then let go. But let go to where? This is the only home this guy knew. Was he going to find his way back? Instantly I had visions of watching movies in the living room during a storm, and as the lightning strikes I see him, pouring at the window, yelling "Mother" at me. I call the hospital and ask about the son. Of course, they can't give me any information, but I explain that I'm considering buying the house and I'm worried that he might show back up. The woman's only reply was, "Well, all I can say is that it's a chance you are going to have to take if you buy it." That was it. I called my dad back and had him remove the offer. No way. Done. A few years later, I drove by the house. It was being fully gutted. I have no idea if the son ever came home. I do know that the new owners made a killing on it when they sold it, but I didn't care. The less old lady ghosts and crazy roaming sons in my life, the better. It was a townhouse, and the floor plan has living area upstairs, bedroom downstairs. You entered the house on the top floor. My first night sleeping there, my bedroom was under the living room. I heard footsteps walking across the living room all night long, to the extent that I grabbed my framing hammer a few times and snuck up there, convinced that someone had broken in. This happened repeatedly for years, and I'm convinced myself it was noise travelling through shared floor beams with neighbouring units. Although it still happened often, even when the unit I shared a wall with was vacant for 18 months. There was also a lot of odd times when doors would crack open slightly and close. Several times this happened when my mom's dog was over. He would walk towards a door, it would open for him. We would walk through it and it would slowly close behind him. When he would come to leave the room, the door would let him out again. Weird. At some point when my now wife moved in, it escalated. One night, I woke up in bed and saw an opaque figure sitting up in our bed. Initially thinking it was my wife sitting upright and looking out the window. When I asked what she was doing, she didn't reply. And when I went to shake her shoulder, my hand just went through nothing. I then realised she was asleep on the pillow, and whatever was standing there just vanished. I jumped out of bed and looked everywhere for an answer. Nothing. I told her about it months later, and she said, "Oh God, I've seen so many strange things here. I didn't want to tell you, because you would have thought I was crazy." There was a lot of other little things. She would yell for me from upstairs because she swore she just saw me walk past the kitchen doorway, etc. Often things would move from where we put them. Once, near Christmas, we left the house and came back to lights being turned on that we know weren't on, and ornaments on our tree being rearranged. We got a break at some point for a while, and when we were in bed one night, bedroom door closed, we made a joke about how our ghost hasn't been active for a while. And as soon as we said it in the bedroom, door started shaking hard in place. Final share, and the one that people seem to think is the creepiest. When our daughter was born, we would shush her to nap with the 3 shush method, rocking her in her arms saying shh, 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 shh. Well, I put her down and I ran to the hardware store. My wife called and said, "I thought you were at the hardware store." And I said, "Yeah, I am now." She paused and yelled, "Get home now." I ran back home. It was a 3-minute drive, and my wife was holding our daughter. She said that after I left our daughter, she started fussing, and over the baby monitor, she heard a shh, shh, shh. And she got confused because she hadn't seen me go back downstairs, not realizing I was already down the hill when the noises started. One last one, daughter related. When she got a few years older, 3 or 4, she would cry at night, and one night I went in and asked her what was wrong. She said she was scared of the shadows. I showed her that the shadows were just light tricks, and I did a shadow puppet, and she said, "I'm not scared of those shadows. I'm scared of the scary shadows that come sometimes." That honestly freaks me out a bit. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago. Me and my friends were freshmen in high school. We frequently went into the woods near our school that had some abandoned structures. Sometimes we went in there to smoke, graffiti, or just otherwise explore. It was always a pretty fun time. On a full day after school, we decided to go exploring in the woods as we would usually do. For the first 10 or 15 minutes into our adventure, everything was normal. Then eventually we came across a tree that had a dagger sticking out of it. I immediately got a horrible feeling. One of my friends, Nathan, went over to the tree and took the dagger out, and sure enough, it was 100% real. I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking, but part of me was hoping it was some sort of gag toy. We all just kind of looked at each other, a little weirded out, but we didn't think much of it. Maybe thought someone left it there before we came to mess with whoever came across it. That's what we were all hoping for. Nathan put the dagger in his backpack and off we went. It wasn't long after we came across the tree that things started to get weird. I was the first to notice it. There was a man in all black following us, keeping a good distance away. He was always to the right of us, hiding behind some trees. From what I could see, he looked to be an average height man wearing a black hoodie, black jeans and black boots. I wanted to leave the second I saw him, but when I told my friends what I had seen, I don't think any of them believed me. They just kind of laughed it off. Either they thought I was seeing things, or they thought someone was just messing with us and they didn't feel very threatened by it. By the time we were about 40 minutes into the woods was when they finally saw him. This time he was a lot closer, about 30 feet away from us. I still couldn't make out much detail about his face because he had his hood on and his head down, although I could see he was wearing a white t-shirt underneath his hoodie. Everyone froze for a brief moment. There were 4 of us, and we just stared, not really sure what to do with the situation. Everyone stood in silence for 3 very long, very scary seconds, until he ran further back into the woods behind some trees, until we couldn't see him. I grabbed onto Nathan's arm, who was the closest to me, and said, "We have to go. Now." I had a horrible pit in my stomach. At first, we made our way back to the entrance of the woods at a jogging pace. I think we were all trying to downplay the experience in our minds, to not invoke pure fear and panic. We kept to that pace for a minute or two, until we heard leaves crunching and sticks breaking behind us. We turn around and there he is, trailing us. We start running, and he starts chasing us. I was the one behind the group, so the man was closest to me, and I could hear his heavy breathing. That's how close he was to me, an arm's length away. We picked up our speed and I thought for sure I was going to pass out because I was fairly out of shape. But luckily, we made it out in about 25 minutes, stopping once or twice to catch our breath when the man wasn't in sight. Once we all got out, we just kind of looked at each other, trying to figure out what the fuck just happened. We didn't talk about it much after. I don't think any of us wanted us to think about it for too long. Looking back on it now, we probably should have reported it to the police in case that man tried to hurt any other innocent kids going into those woods. But unfortunately, the thought didn't cross our mind. I don't know if it was him who placed that dagger in the tree or why it was there, and honestly, I don't want to think about it. I don't know why he was there or what his intentions were. I'm just glad we got away, and I hope he hasn't hurt or tried to hurt anyone since. So to the man who followed and chased me and my friends in the woods, let's not meet again. When I was 16, some friends and I went to an outdoor concert festival thing. We parked at the mall and took a shuttle to the venue. For perspective, the mall is a 20-minute drive from our homes, and the venue is another 20 minutes in a different direction. During the concert, I ended up losing my friends in the crowd. I didn't care much, as I wanted to get to the front, and I could just call them after the concert ended. Well, of course, I lose my phone somewhere in the sea of people, and don't even notice till the last show wraps up. I search the ground as the people dissipate with no luck. Reluctantly, I just hop on the bus heading back to the mall, hoping to meet them at the car. The car is gone, and I start to freak out a little bit. It's 10 PM when I head to the bus station to see when the next bus to my city is coming. Just my luck, it happens to be Memorial Day, so no buses till 10 AM. I borrow a stranger's phone and call the two numbers I know, my mom and my brother. My mom doesn't answer, my brother does. He basically gives me the sucks to suck talk and hangs up. So I'm alone, scared, and a little drunk in a city I don't know. I try walking, but quickly give up when I realise I'm basically walking down a random highway toward who knows where. Back at the station, I'm just staring at the map when a stranger creeps up behind me. He asks me where I'm heading, and I tell him the truth. He, conveniently, is going to the same city and asks if I'd like to split a cab. Realising this is my only option, as I didn't have enough on my own, we get in the car. Turns out he was even less than I do. We barely have enough to get to the heart of the city, which is a 10-minute drive from my house, but at least I know my way home from there. During the drive, this guy gets progressively more creepy. He's aware I'm 16, he's 25. He scoots closer every minute, touching me, insisting I come with him to his place, and even writes his phone number on my bare leg. As we get there, I realise the situation I'm in. We're about to get out in a quiet area at 2 AM, and the cabbie is going to drive off, leaving no one to hear me scream. The second he gets out, I turn to the driver and beg him to take me a few streets further, so I could at least put some distance from him and me. The cab driver hadn't said a word the whole way, but he definitely heard everything. He asks me for my address and drives me all the way home. Creeper watches as the cab drives off, me still inside. When we got to my home, I offered to wake my mum up to pay him, but he declined, saying he's just glad I'm safe. I broke in through the kitchen window, got to bed, and cried my tears of relief for who knows how long.